Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical, the first official collaborative recording over here in 2025 on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. And I am here with Cami. It is wonderful to have another great conversation with you tonight.
I cannot tell you how excited I am for this conversation. I feel like I've been waiting a millennial for it because this has been sitting on my palette since I read this, and I just cannot get this comic series out of my head.
You know, I gotta say, I'm glad that we're here tonight to talk about this specific comic because it is a true gem. It really is. It started at the end of 2023. It was a 6-issue miniseries in total, but considering the fact that the larger portion of this story came out in 2024, as far as I'm concerned, it's a 2024 book. And it's a book that, like you said, I can't get it out of my head. I always talk about it. And I will also say it was such a wonderful thing to go on YouTube right before the new year began, seeing what a lot of people were ranking as their best comic books or comic book of the year. And a lot of people were thankfully out there reading from IDW, the one that is not the Ninja Turtles comic book, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees by Patrick Horvath, a name that we actually talked about briefly last year when we discussed a comic series of another artist that we hold near and dear to our hearts, who will be discussing a lot of his work in 2025. And that, of course, is the fact that Patrick Horvath did the artwork for Ha Ha issue number 4 by W. Maxwell Prince. And that's the reason why that name was out there in the world for me. So how did I actually discover this book? Because everybody knows that when we're having a conversation, it is almost 99.9% of the time that we're all discussing a specific comic book because I begged everybody else to read it. I'm not going to lie about that. But so Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees came out in late October of 2023. That was when issue number 1 came out. And I just remembered looking at the book on the sites where I find out about all the new releases that are coming up. And I looked at the name who was attached to it, and I remember the name of Patrick Horvath, and I was just like saying, do I want to get this book? Do I not want to get this book? Because it just, I wasn't sure, because I was being very smart, very selective in regards to what I was reading. But ironically, I let the month go by and let the first issue come out. And then I saw images and blurbs for the second issue in December, and then I just couldn't get this book out of my head. And I just said to myself, I don't know why, but there's something about this book that is intriguing me. And then when I revisited the blurb, and it says, Dexter meets Richard Scarry's Busy Town, I said to myself, why did I sit on issue number 1? So I called my comic store. I said, do you by any chance have any more of this book? And he said, no, we sold out. And so I said, okay, I'll try and find it in some other means. And it was so strange because some of the most reliable outlets that I get my comics online, if I need to, how almost every single one of them didn't have issue number 1. And the fact that I finally found it on eBay, and the book was basically being sold for no less than $15 at the time. And the funniest thing is, I got the book for about that price. The first issue actually came after I picked up issue number 2, because I clearly put it on my pull list. So I said, I don't think I need to let this one skip. So I actually read issue number 2 before I read issue number 1.
Oh, how do you do that?
I don't know. But like when I read issue number 2, the best part was like I kind of felt like I already understood everything that was going on. But I just said, I have a feeling I'm going to love issue number 1. This book is chef's kiss perfection. That's all I'm going to say. I cannot stress it enough. The manager at my comic book store says the exact same thing. My brother-in-law has read it and he cannot get over how good this book is. So I just want to say that I am grateful that I took a chance on Patrick Horvath and this incredible book. And I'm so glad that I am here finally talking about this book with someone who appreciates stories like this.
Well, the funny thing is, though, I sat on the first issue because normally when you will tell me, read this and this is something up your alley, you didn't have the same pizzazz behind it. So I'm like, okay, maybe it's all right. But when you re-brought it to my attention and it was pretty much within the same week, you're like, please tell me you picked it up already. I'm like, no, what you just mentioned it to me. Okay, you need to get this book because if you don't, I fear that you're not going to find it. And so I immediately went to the library, which normally the library waits a little bit before they have them in stock. So I was like, okay, well, let me just go ahead and check them out from the library first and see if I like it. And it was like love at first sight. I was like, oh my God, why did I sleep on this? Why did I not pick this up sooner? There was just something so eerily haunting about it. You just craved more when you were done. You wanted it to be like a series you could binge in one sitting, but you knew you had to wait for the next issue, and I was just eerily surprised how good it was. The artwork was phenomenal, and it made you feel like you were doing something wrong when you were reading it because it felt so good when you got to the end, but it was just so well written. The story is just so well executed from top to bottom. There's nothing left unturned. And the characters are also lovable. I mean, you literally will be sad when somebody passes, it's one of those connect stories. So yeah, this is one you don't want to miss. If you haven't read it yet, you are sorely missing out.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Patrick Horvath is an artist that we briefly knew just because of the fact that he did the issues of Haha. But it's sort of like my attitude when I was also sitting on Scotty Young's Twig. It was like, I know his artwork, but I don't know how well he writes. And, taking the risk on getting Twig, and then I would eventually read things like Middle West and Ain't No Grave. I'm like, wow, Scotty Young writes just as well as he draws. And I also started to learn a little bit about Patrick Horvath and the fact that this guy was someone who really tried to make it in the entertainment world and unfortunately failed. And the fact that he went to the world of comics to try and get his work out there. I don't necessarily feel that you would get an extremely large buzz if you started working with W. Maxwell Prince, but the W. Maxwell Prince faithful will remember you. And that's why we take a look at where we are now and the fact that this series is out there. Patrick Horvath is now one of those names that is slowly creeping into everybody's comic book lexicon because we're happy to know that in April of 2025, there will be a follow-up to this series with Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees the Rite of Spring. There's going to be a one-shot that Patrick Horvath is going to be doing over at Ani Press, which I'm really excited about. But what I'm also hoping for is that he and W. Maxwell Prince get together and do some more collaborative work because these two guys are artists that you can easily jump on their wagons because of how little work they have. Maybe outside of Ice Cream Man for W. Maxwell Prince, but these guys are still relatively newbies in the business because of how many years they've been here. And I'm just looking forward to seeing Patrick Horvath have a great year, which I truly feel that he will because the people who read Beneath the Trees have definitely had good things to say about these books.
Yeah, I mean, it was just highly praised, across the masses. And I think anybody who put their name behind a blurb for this really had the same visceral reaction that we did. We didn't see this coming. And when we finally gave it a few minutes of our time, we were so blown away that how is this guy not bigger than he already is, And it was a slow bleed after that because you just craved more. I mean, every issue, you loved the writing, you loved the artwork, you loved the storyline, you fell in love with another character. And, Patton Oswalt, he's also did, a lot of talking up on this series. And I really love to hear his thoughts on things, because when he puts his name behind something, something sinister is at work. You know that there is something that's going to just captivate your attention. And so after reading the first two issues, I knew I was a sucker for however many issues of this was going to come through. There's just nothing bad I can say about this series. And I cannot implore people enough. If you don't have it, go, take a copy from your library like I did and try it out. But I can guarantee you, if you're a collector of any kind, you're going to want to get your hands on some physical media when it comes to this series.
Yeah, that's the scariest thing. I can't get over how valuable these 6 books are. Like, I'm actually looking on eBay how much, already over $100 for all 6 issues. Like, one issue number 1 is on sale for like $50 or more. Like, I'm afraid to actually open up these books and read this story multiple times. I may have to be going out to get the trade, but it's just like, again, I'm really surprised that I passed on the first issue, because like the cover itself is filled with intrigue, just because of the
Yeah,
fact that it looks like a children's book, but it's not a children's book, yet it's made to look that way. That's why I always wonder, like, I'm thrilled that I got my hands on the first prints of all 6 issues, but I still can't get over how I almost let the first one slip through my fingers. I
And
really
that's
cannot
what's so
believe it.
ironic to me, is the fact that I love children's stories. I read middle grade so often. It's just part of my, monthly routine. And when I saw the cover, that's kind of what was off-putting to me. I'm like, this seems a little too kid-like, So in my mind, I'm thinking that maybe the writing was just very juvenile. So it didn't captivate me right away. But then it was the artwork that kept me coming back, because I knew what lied between the pages, and I knew what the story was about after reading the first issue. And I was just so intrigued by how whimsical this was drawn, but how sinister it truly was. But it was just so, I don't know, it has a Wonderland feel to it, because
It's a dark story, but there's
yes.
just something innocent in there too.
Yeah, and I sell that to people a lot when I'm talking about Wonderland, because I'm like, I don't think you realize how sinister Wonderland really is. It's very dark, it's very dismal. There's a lot happening in there, but people choose to focus on, the happy part of it. And I think that's what really made me fall in love with this, is just how sinister it truly is, but how you walk away still feeling like you ate a cupcake.
Yeah, so the story itself starts in this quiet little town called Woodbrook. It's a nice little town. Everybody knows each other. Everybody pretty much has their doors unlocked for their neighbors. And we're introduced to the main character who runs the hardware store. And you couldn't pick a better name for a character that is an anthropomorphic animal, specifically in this case, a bear. Her name is Samantha Strong. And that's another interesting thing I found that is so interesting about my reading. I find myself now drawn much more towards books about anthropomorphic animals, or just animals in general. But I also love the fact that, in a world where everybody is knocking on the girl boss and the strong female character, this one does not feel forced. Samantha Strong is a genuine article, and she narrates the first part of this story, talks about how wonderful the town is, how she loves everybody, how everybody loves each other. And then you get to that innocence. Like, I love the character that's the mole, about how he can never find his glasses. Like, I love that line. And so that's something right out of a children's story. But and that's like about 2/3 of the book. We're talking about how there's going to be a big parade, how the whole community is going to be there. The kids don't have to go to school. And then Samantha just says, I'm going to go out for a bit. And she takes a trip into the city. And then the book does a complete 180. She bumps into a stranger who needs a little bit of help. And then she takes out a rag filled with chloroform, takes this person out into the woods, hangs this anthropomorphic duck character by his feet in a tree, and slits his throat. And then
I knew we were in for a treat after that. I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? What am I looking at?
and then the even weirder part, which I think is such a beautiful touch to this story, and that's the weird meta-like moment when she's burying the body and a bear comes out of the woods and stares at her and she goes, "Oh, these are your woods, huh?" I'm like, there are anthropomorphic bears and there are actual bears. That is one of the greatest little touches in this story. And she says, "Don't worry, I won't make a mess," to a certain
Yeah.
degree. And then we basically learn what the whole story is about. Samantha is a serial killer, but she is a very smart person at her craft because she knows if this is her hobby, which is, of course, one of the weirdest hobbies you could ever have, but she knows, do not do this job close to the town. Woodbrook stays the way it is. Woodbrook mustn't be touched. Woodbrook is innocent. I will not go anywhere near there. And then she comes back, the parade's happening, and then the entire town is shocked because one of the floats apparently has a dead body of one of the townspeople basically crucified and seen. What a way to start a book like this.
Well, and I think that's kind of where I grappled with myself about, should I really love this as much as I do? Because, when it comes to a serial killer that has, I guess, a vengeful reasoning behind their killings, and not to say any killing is justified, but it just seems like, because this is referred to often as Dexterish, because Dexter is very smart and calculated and meticulous about his killings, but he's killing specific people for a reason. She's just randomly selecting innocent people. So there is a sense of morality that should, come into play as you're reading this. But it is hard to grapple with, but it's just so hard to look away from, because even though she is who she is, you still love her, and there's a side of her that's fantastic. And that's the crappy thing about serial killers, is that there's so much about them that is intriguing and interesting and smart, but at the end of the day, there are cold-blooded killers. So there's a lot of grappling as a true crime reader that you have to do too, and just kind of look away for a minute and just be like, okay, take a breather, this person is insane and so are you. So
But you're absolutely right. You're talking about how you still find this character lovable, and that's
yes.
what's so interesting about how the rest of the story progresses in regards to her specific storyline. She may be a serial killer, but she gets mad upset about the fact that there's another killer in her town, and they are breaking her rules. She's like, "No, you cannot do that in this town." So she then takes the role of detective to try and find the other killer. But at the same time, she's doing this because she has a feeling that someone might look at her the wrong way and think that she is the killer, which I also found, that's beautiful writing right there.
Yeah, and it was a great tie-in also to just kind of help the flow of the story, to kind of take us and keep us intrigued, because if it didn't captivate you, or the idea of having a female serial killer right off the jump, now you're intrigued because you're like, oh, there's not one killer, but now there's two. And how is she going to flip the switch and just be a detective and stop killing? But no, she's still doing her thing while she's trying to figure out who this other person is. And I just think there's some bloody brilliance behind that.
And speaking of bloody brilliance, I mean, when I passed on the first issue, it was the cover of the second issue that basically said to me, okay, this is the real deal. And it's another one of those crazy moments. It's an anthropomorphic pig staring at pig heads in a butcher shop. So I'm just like, Wow. So, and speaking of which, that is when we go into the second issue, and this innocent town is not so innocent. Like, there's a town hall meeting. People are talking about buying any kind of lock to lock up their houses and keep their kids safe. Basically saying that no one ever actually had a lock on their door because everybody trusted everybody. And of course, during the town meeting, we're introduced to Cherry, the bitch that we really all love to hate. Because this, you know what? If you've watched a movie, if you've watched a television show that has these types of moments, there's always going to be that one hothead that is ready to point fingers, wants to make themselves heard, and is not solving anything, but rather making the situation worse. And Cherry is just one of those firm characters, but a nervous wreck because, of course, she's one of those people that feels I'm too important to die.
And I'll tell you, she was very well written because I can't stand her. I
I know.
absolutely hate her. There is nothing lovable about her. I find her annoying and pretentious, and she always shows up at the most inopportune times, giving her 2 cents on every matter. And she's obnoxious. I
And she
wanted her gone.
pussy whipped her husband.
Yeah.
He's like, I just get pushed around. And she goes, that's why I love you. I'm like, oh my God, what a bitch. Which is why I'm kind of glad she got her comeuppance.
Oh, it was just the best. It was the cherry on top. No pun
Literally.
intended.
And so this is where things start to get a little bit more intense for Samantha because because the killings are not only pretty gruesome, but they're happening a lot more frequently. And this is when she, of course, is friendly with the local sheriff, and the sheriff is starting to talk to her about it. And he is expecting her to maybe, of course, along with the other townspeople, give some insight. She's having some very rough nights, and she's basically looking at everybody in many different ways to say, well, who could possibly be the person out there that could be doing the killings? And there are little clues that come. One of them is the fact that the person seems to be allergic to lavender. And that's when she comes across a possible suspect. And it gets to the point where she actually goes to that person's house and sees some very awkward things. But then the best part is when the layers are ripped away.
Melody.
Melody, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember her name, but I know she was an anthropomorphic cat.
Yes.
And
that's why I'm drawn to her. I was like, oh, a cat, finally.
but I was very intrigued in issue number 3 when Samantha was discovering those little interesting things that didn't seem so kosher, if you will. But when they actually encounter each other face to face, and that's also one of the other interesting things, you know, when you take a look at what started in issue 1 and you see a character like Melody holding a gun to Samantha's face, that's like things are getting real here.
This was the issue, though. This is what really kept me on the edge of my seat and wanting more from the series, because she had all the telltale signs that something was off with her. And, you know, she was a butcher. She had the gun. She had the suspicious body in the bed. You know, there was a lot of weird things happening with Melody. And you were telling yourself the whole time, she's got to be guilty. She's got to be the killer. And then she's not, but she's still weird. Don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously we discovered that in issue number 3, but I mean, to get you 3 issues into a series like this and then to still be excited about it, that is good writing.
But you know something? I disagree with you because when I took a look, because I didn't find her to be weird, because that's the thing. When Samantha basically has the standoff with Melody and Melody tells her story, I just felt heartbroken because of the fact that she lost her husband and she's just extremely lonely, and that this is her only way that she feels is right for her in terms of coping with her loss. Personally, I had so much pity for her, and
You have not read enough grief horror then. She's weird and this is off and there's nothing natural about it. Yes, it's sad, but she's off put. She's a very odd duck, and to have your deceased husband in your bedroom and you sleep next to him, that's weird. There's nothing normal
I thought
about
it was a taxidermy thing.
he's still dead. He's still dead. He's still dead. Even though he's an animal, it's like, ew. I mean, as long as there was no,
do you even hear about what's happening right now in the real world? That there is now a company that allows you to have a stuffed replica of a pet of yours that passed away.
as much of an animal lover as I am, Steve, I would never in a million years do that, because to me, that is opening up a Pandora's box that you do not want to open up when it comes to the emotions of a pet that you've lost. And then to have one that is lifelike with the fur and the teeth and the eyes, that there is something the hell wrong with people that do that. I'm sorry. And it is no different for me with Melody and her taxidermist husband, who is lying in their bed that they share. Ew.
I'm not saying anything about that thing that's actually out there in the real world. I'm not classifying that as normal. As a matter of fact, when I actually heard about this, I literally said, you're basically telling me that people really need to be coddled in so many different ways now, and it's sick.
There comes a point as an animal lover that you have to come to the realization that you say goodbye someday, and that is going to be one of the hardest things you ever do. I mean, caring for an animal from start to finish, you're going to go through the highs and the lows as it is. But when you come to the end, there is a finality in the goodbye. And yes, there is a market for every weird freaking person out there. But to say that you're allotting for someone to, instead of then bury this animal and grieve and let it go, we're going to stuff it and stick it in your living room so that your family can come pet it at Thanksgiving. I don't think so. If I did that with any of my deceased animals, my mom would probably disown me. She'd be like, okay, you have reached another level of weird. And she already calls me weird, you know? So it's not okay. That for me was a lot, but that for me also gave this a very strong element of horror, and it showed his diversity and the ability to be able to write in multiple subgenres of horror. Now we're not just talking slasher horror here. Now we're doing grief horror. And grief horror is not something a lot of people talk about, but it is some of the most beautifully written horror out there.
Right. And so this is where I would actually want to pose a question, because when we get to the end of issue number 3, when pretty much, you see, that's another thing I love so much about this little town, the fact that everybody knows each other, everybody goes to the festival, everyone goes to the funeral of a neighbor. That's just something you don't see frequently, or maybe that's just because of the fact that I am from a big city and I'm not from a small town, even though at this point in time I technically live in a small town. I've never
because
really.
You didn't grow up there your whole life. I think if maybe like you inherited your parents' home or something like that, and you knew your neighbors, you know.
Yes.
I think there might still be some towns like that, but you're right, they're very far and few in between anymore.
But at the end of issue number 3, Samantha pins the killer. Mm-hmm. And it's a character who we actually had seen a couple of times, a character named Nigel, an anthropomorphic mouse, who's actually home from school taking care of his elderly mother. So the question that I actually wanted to pose to you was, how did you feel when we knew at this point in time that this was going to be a 6-issue miniseries, and we now already know who the killer is? Did you feel like, how is Patrick Horvath going to give us the rest of this story, or like how is he going to fill in the remaining 3 issues? Did you have any doubts? Because one of the few things that I personally can say about miniseries is, yes, they're short stories, they're not ongoings, but you've got to stick that landing. You've got to give us a great story from beginning to end. So I won't lie, I had a little bit of doubt going into issue number 4. How did you feel?
The only feeling I felt going into issue number 4 was, damn it, I was duped again, because this happens to me in horror movies all the damn time. I never can pin the killer ever. No matter how many horror movies I've seen, I always get it wrong. So I was like, damn it, it was the little quiet one. I missed it again. How did this happen? And then I was like, you've got me, Horvath. You've got me till the end, and I cannot wait. I had complete faith in his abilities because I think at this point, even though it was starting to pick up momentum and people, comic readers were talking about it, and there was a big discussion about, if you're not reading this, you're missing something. I think that his intent was still to stop it at the 6 issues, regardless. So he already had the intent. I've got to pack this punch at the end because my readers are counting on me. And I think a lot more weighed on him to ensure that he stuck this landing because of the fact that it got such big press and people were really, hamming this up like, this is going to be the story of the year. And so I think honestly, he had it nailed from the beginning. We just had to have the faith as readers to see it through.
Right. And so in the 4th issue, Samantha and Nigel basically have their first encounter. And this is where you really should have realized that Nigel was the killer because of one major thing that I was like, oh, well, that makes so much sense. The fact that he came home from school to take care of his mother, but his mother was always saying, Nigel, you don't need to help me. I can take care of myself. You should go back to school. You should go live your life. Why is he staying so long if his mother is clearly showing that she's independent? I should have seen that and I didn't.
And that's why I said I was duped again, because the signs were there and I missed it.
And he basically tells Samantha he's known about her little secret and that he admired her for it. And he sort of wanted to show her that he could be just as tactical and smart as she is, and that he wanted to try and form a partnership. And Samantha, of course, I'm like, excuse me, this is a 1-person job. And 2, you're already sloppy and you're already careless. I wouldn't dream of having you as a partner. And so basically, and no pun intended, he basically says to her, well, then I'm just going to have to bury you.
Yeah, and I think that, you have seen this plot in horror movies before where there attempts to be a teamwork and the other person wants to be the lone wolf. And the young one wants to be the apprentice, so to speak. But if your alpha killer, which Samantha clearly is, already has a plan in place, there is no secondary, there is no place in line and a second spot available. So I knew that this was going to play out very well, because then now she has to, in her mind, play out, okay, how am I going to safely get rid of him without putting all the limelight on me? So I'm like, I'm intrigued. Let's go. It's go time. And then now we jump into the last couple of issues.
Yeah, and the worst thing happens at the end of the 4th issue, and that is the fact that the person, I hope I get his name, it's Charlie, right?
Yes. Oh my God.
When
I was so heartbroken.
When Charlie was murdered, clearly by Nigel, and basically everyone immediately goes straight to Samantha. She's the killer. Some people don't believe it, but that is where your heart is broken, because you didn't want Charlie to die.
Really, though, you got to give it to Nigel in that moment, though, because he really tried to set Samantha up for failure at that point and make her look like suspect number 1. So in a way, I do give him brownie points, even as this, junior serial killer. He did kind of put some thought behind that. Like, how can I keep the eyes off me and make her the number 1 suspect and get her out of the picture? It didn't work in his favor, but I gave him kudos for that.
And then we get to issue number 5, and I will probably say that issue number 5 is the weakest part of it. But you know what's really funny? Reading it again for the purpose of having this recording, I realized that even though it is the slowest part, and that really is the filler issue, it's very important. And it's because of one moment that happens. Because basically, we get a little bit into Samantha's past. We learn why Samantha went in the direction that she did. And a lot of her past is coming back to haunt her now, like especially when you see like all the dead bodies that she's added to her collection, and they're like taunting her and stuff. Then we get towards the end of issue number 5, and she has another one of those encounters with the bear. And it's in that moment when she realizes, I'm in someone else's territory. I need to step away and go back to my business. And that's when she has her epiphany. Nigel's in my space. He has to go. He can't invade my space. And that's when she knows, I got to face him again, or face the consequences of my own doings. And
Yeah,
I loved the ending of issue number 5.
yeah, it was a very ominous moment, and it all kind of came together, and it really, again, every issue I felt ended just the right way to set you up for the excitement for the following issue. You know, you were ready to go again. You were like, okay, what's next? What can we possibly encounter? I do think, though, you know, stepping into the final issues, we wanted to make sure that there were no messy endings, and I don't think he left any stone unturned. I really think all of the storyline was very well executed.
No, the ending of the issue number 6, there was that one last little twist in there that just nobody ever saw coming. It was the fact that Nigel's mother knew that Nigel was a killer and that Samantha was a killer.
That
I was
blew
shocked.
me away, because her mind was gone, or at least she gave the illusion that her mind was gone, and she, you know, she was just kind of holding on by a thread, but she was sharp as a tack. And that, again, it threw me by surprise. I wasn't expecting that, and I was like, oh god, this isn't gonna end well.
Because basically it's like, she knows that Nigel's her son and she loves
Yeah.
him dearly, but she knows he's done wrong and he needs to face the consequences. And the fact that she and Samantha sort of plotted the whole thing for the purposes of having Samantha get her innocence. That is probably, again, that was the second part of this 2-part twist that I never would have expected to come. But my God, it was so perfectly done. And then you get, and it sets you up for that wonderful ending where Samantha basically says, I need to take a break for now. Like that was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And then when I put that 6th issue down, I said, oh God, nothing is going to top this book for the rest of this year. And there were some amazing comic books that came out. I say this so much, and I know we're going to do a best of 2024, but I've got to say it now. Otherwise, it's just not going to be, I'm just like feeling like it's going to be an incomplete video. If it wasn't for Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, Feral would have been my favorite book of 2024. But this book is something special. That's what it is. And I don't really use that word. I don't think in all of these recordings that I've ever actually said this book is something special. This book is a gem. I don't say that about
said that
comics.
With Twig. I want to say you said that with Twig.
If I did, then I wouldn't be surprised, just because Twig, even though it's a completely different story from Beneath the Trees, there's nothing out there like it.
And I think that's why it got that crown of achievement. And I think that's the case here with Beneath the Trees. I don't think it's anything that we've seen in recent years. I don't think anyone could touch this. I think, you know, now that we've seen it, it is something special. It is something that has just brought us into a different phase of comics. It's kind of at the perfect time too, because being in my 40s and having grown up on Richard Scarry, I think that, you know, this kind of ties my childhood love of animation and my love of horror in one basket. And it's just so beautifully done that I can't be mad at this for being creepy and, you know, making me sick to my stomach at times. But I love the fact that they ended it with her saying she needed to go into a state of hibernation, because it does still bring it back. She's a bear, you know, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah,
I can't say enough about this series. I want everybody to read it twice and own it. I'm not one to really sell commercialism, and I don't push people out there, if there's other avenues, that people can obtain their media, I'm all for that, especially using your local library. But this is a special one, and I really feel like people should own a physical copy of this some
Absolutely.
way, somehow, because this is one you're going to want to revisit down the road.
Absolutely. I totally agree. You need a physical copy. Like I said, I may have to get myself a bind up of this book just because I had no idea how valuable. That's the part that still intrigues me the most. I cannot get over how valuable these floppies are. And also, don't forget, there's some beautiful variant covers by Riley Rossmo. Riley Rossmo right now is another artist that I am very much following. He's actually working with Daniel Warren Johnson right now on the Image miniseries The Moon is Following Us, which is amazing. But that's the thing. I didn't get a chance to really talk about the artwork here. That's, I think, another one of the major selling points because Patrick Horvath's watercolor effects are so beautiful. I said that in our haha discussion. I didn't really care much for the story of issue number 4, but I did love the artwork. It's just so different. And when you take a look at the issue that he drew of haha compared to Beneath the Trees, you can definitely tell it's him, but it still feels like you're looking at two completely different things because Beneath the Trees reads like a storybook, like especially issue number 1. It feels like a childhood storybook, a Richard Scarry book or a Little Golden Book. And that's, I think, another one of the major reasons why this book is just one of those that you just are always thinking about and you're always willing to pick it up again and read it numerous times. I mean, considering that I've already read it twice, and that's the other thing. I'm glad that we were talking about this book too, because I was reading it issue by issue. When you do get to read all 6 at once, it's fantastic. It really is.
Because it flows so well. I think when I finally did pick it up, issue 1 and 2 were already out, and issue 3 was going to be released like the next day. So I just immediately said, okay, I'm just going to binge those 3, and I just couldn't wait for 4, 5, and 6. So it was difficult to wait, but you're absolutely right. When you have them all in your hands, it's all you want to do is just power through them because they are that brilliant. But I do think the blurb on the back of the IDW hardcover is just brilliant by Simon Spurrier. It says, a bright, shiny, vile gem of a book. That sums it up.
So then that's the big question that we'll talk about before we officially wrap this video. Apparently, the story's not over. And that's the truth.
It leaves it open, definitely, for a sequel.
It leaves it open, but it's also one of those. You see, that's the thing I like when it comes to comic books and certain endings. The ending where you could have more, but if this truly was the end of the story, you wouldn't be upset about it.
Exactly.
So that's the part that gets me a little bit nervous because do sequels always live up to the original? Not always. And I do know that in April, we do have Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, The Rite of Spring coming out. Patrick Horvath, thank goodness, is back, is obviously writing it and doing the artwork. Pretty much everybody that worked on Beneath the Trees is back. So I'm excited for that. I don't know how long the miniseries is going to be. I would love it if it's an additional 6 issues because it just feels right. But I wonder if Patrick Horvath will be able to deliver another true gem.
As a fan of horror, I am no stranger to a sequel. I will say that the sequel is never as strong as the original. However, you stand a much stronger chance of a sequel being at least palatable, and that's just the jumping off point if you get back the original cast. So I think the fact that we have the full embodiment of writing and artistic value through Horvath, and then we're going to get the colorist and probably the letterist and everything the same. If we can keep that original integrity, I think the sequel stands a really good chance. I have a lot of faith in Horvath's ability to deliver a story because there wasn't a single issue in this first arc that was a disappointment to me. So yeah. I'm all on board, and I can't wait to revisit this conversation with you at the end of the next arc.
I mean, look, we both were very fortunate to get a sequel that was just as good or if not better than the original, and that was when we got Dan Panosian's Alice Ever After, followed by Alice Never After, which I absolutely love. Still waiting for that third
Still waiting,
installment.
still waiting. Oh my God,
But
I
we
cannot
will
wait
have
for that
something
third.
to hold us over, because I did tell you, and we will talk about this series, knowing that Dan Panosian will be back doing a Peter Pan story called Last Boy. I already read the blurb. It's coming out in March. Cami, I'm telling you, I said that 2024 was going to be a very important year in Western comics. And outside of Beneath the Trees, I mean, it was really more about the Energon universe and the Ghost Machine universe, along with everything that was going on in Dynamite. That was very much the talk of the town. But Beneath the Trees was there. The people who were reading it were raving about it, us included. But I am just hoping that, Beneath the Trees, Rite of Spring, gets a lot more word of mouth and people do go out and read that book. And more importantly, go back to Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees and see where it all began, because it's going to be an exciting year. And like I said, it'll be nice to see something else from IDW outside of Ninja Turtles. Not that Ninja Turtles is a bad thing, but that's one of the other things I didn't get a chance to say. When people were talking about IDW last year, oh God, all they could talk about was how this company was in the toilet and how they were losing so many rights to so many different properties and that other companies were snatching them up. And the only thing that was basically keeping them alive was Ninja Turtles. And they had The Last Ronin and they had Jason Aaron come and do the new series. Beneath the Trees, I actually will say, was probably one of the best shots in the heart that IDW could get, because so many people went out and got that book. And because of the fact that they've officially advertised IDW Dark with Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, Rite of Spring headlining it, I would like to see this company continue to give us this kind of content.
I love IDW. They're one of my favorite publishing companies. Though, I'm a huge TMNT fan, so of course I have a lot of material from IDW. But I think that they stand a really good shot of being very successful in 25 and years to come. I think they just need to, as you're saying, open up their base a little bit and, give us a little bit more than the Turtles, because, the Turtles has a huge fan base, but not everybody reads TMNT. I do love, though, that they are they're partial to not only giving us the history of the Turtles but the future of the Turtles. So I give them credit where credit is due. I commend them for that. But I am very much looking forward to the next story arc. And again, I cannot implore our audience enough. Go out and grab this if you haven't. Read it, love it, absorb it, and we'll be back to talk to you about arc 2 soon, hopefully.
Exactly. It's $16 on Amazon for the bind up, guys. You forget if you're not even a comic book fan. Just read this book. It will blow your mind. It's beautiful.
It will. You won't be disappointed. I promise you.
Right. So I think that's going to wrap it up. Cami, this was wonderful. We were so looking forward to talking about this book, and I'm glad that I finally got to talk about this with somebody. So, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between, leave a comment. We'd love to talk to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. If you have been watching, there's going to be a bunch of videos dropping along with this one. I've been hard at work getting some stuff out there into the YouTube space. But don't worry, there will be plenty of conversation videos coming in the next coming weeks. And we're hoping that you're all going to be a part of it. We will see you in the next one.
Take care.